Going. Welcome to Bridges Not Walls, the community relations vlogcast that we are continuing. As I think I shared with a lot of you, I was recently in Israel as part of a program called the Mandel Institute for Nonprofit Leadership's Executive Leadership Program. I'm a part of the fifth cohort of this program, and they're incredible. They've made a tremendous investment in a lot of Jewish communal professionals across the country who are getting ready to be in higher leadership positions, and they've made similar investments all across Israel, which I didn't know about. After the trip, I endeavored to experience even more of Israel that we didn't get from the trip. I participated in a program that brought us in contact with some Palestinians from East Jerusalem, and stayed with family members on a yeshuv or a settlement in the West Bank, which can be very controversial, but it was a part of the bigger picture that I wanted to make sure we had access to. I had access to. So, having said all of that, I want to give you all a brief update, as we always do, on what's going on in the world. So, locally, here in Charleston, we are all just on the tail end of the primary runoffs for a lot of races, including state legislature races, county sheriff. The results of that are a mixed bag for folks who are moderates like us. So at the county level, of course, for the Democrats, we have Sheriff Kristen Graziano, who is our incumbent sheriff. She's been sheriff for 4 years and certainly has had a relationship with the Jewish community. And the results of the runoff earlier this week indicate that her opponent, nominated by the Republican Party, will be Chief Carl Ritchie. He is the former police chief of Mount Pleasant and town council member in Mount Pleasant now. He also has had a history with the Jewish community. He was a supporter of the hate intimidation ordinance that passed in Mount Pleasant, and worked with our security folks when he was chief. So, two qualified candidates. We are working on a sheriff's candidate forum for the Jewish community, and we'll keep you updated with information about that. Across the state, we saw a lot of state house and state senate seats have pretty shocking results in their primaries. In particular, 3 female GOP senators, Katrina Shealy, Henry Gustafson, and Sandy Sen here in Charleston, were all defeated in their primary and primary runoff races after taking a very famous stand in opposing the proposed abortion ban in South Carolina, at odds with their own party. They, along with their Democratic colleagues, call themselves the Sister Senators, and they actually received a leadership award from a national organization for taking that stand together. However you feel about the issue, it certainly isn't common to see folks stand up against the majority of their own party on an issue that they feel passionately about. So that was something that garnered a great deal of respect. Unfortunately, for those 3 GOP senators, they've all lost their seat to more conservative, politically extreme candidates. So it remains to see what the impact of that is going to be, but there will be no GOP women senators in this upcoming Senate. And certainly the immediate outcome would indicate that we're going to have an even more polarized South Carolina legislature than we did before this round of elections. Of course, the general elections are happening this November for the South Carolina Senate and the South Carolina House. They're shouldn't be too many surprises in that election. The districts are very partisan districts, and there's only a couple that are really competitive, and in those districts, I don't think there's much of a race, and certainly not here in the Charleston area. So the big news is that Representative Mace won her primary, and Michael Moore, running for the Democratic Party, won his primary. Representative Mace, as of yesterday, has committed to doing a candidate forum with the Charleston Jewish Federation. So we'll have more on that. We've reached out to Mr. Moore from the Democratic Party, and we'll keep you updated about the progress that we make in planning that forum. But we're looking to do it at the tail end of August. And as of today, we are the only organization in the state of South Carolina or anywhere that Representative Mace has made a commitment to participate in a forum for the general election. And she's indicated to me that she may not make that commitment to any other organization. So that speaks to the work that the Jewish community is doing, and we're definitely excited to be able to bring these elected officials to you. In Israel this week, which will be very relevant to the presentation that we're about to embark upon, the Israeli Supreme Court has decided that Haredi Israelis need to serve in the Israeli Armed Forces. This isn't currently the case. It is a source of much conflict in Israel, and you'll understand that in a few minutes why it's such a source of controversy and conflict in Israel. Also, here in Charleston, we saw the outcome of a couple of really important issues that our organization has been advocating on. Number one, educational censorship. Now, if you've been following us, you know that for a while we have very publicly pushed back against efforts to ban books in both public libraries and school libraries. There have been Holocaust-related books on the chopping block, along with African American history books and books that have LGBTQ content in them. And we've been so far pretty successful. We've done that work in coalition with the ACLU of South Carolina, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and a bunch of organizations across the state, including the Columbia Jewish Federation. And in a bit more good news, the bill that we have been fighting for 2 straight sessions that would ban certain pieces of historical content from South Carolina schools and punish teachers for including that historical content that makes students feel uncomfortable. That bill has once again failed by a single vote in the South Carolina Senate. They failed to give the bill free conference committee, which, long story short, means that the bill won't be enacted into law this session. We're one of the only southern states, if not the only southern state, that hasn't passed a censorship bill like this one. However, that being said, if you've been following the news, you know that our superintendent of education, Ellen Weaver, who has been closely affiliated with both the Heritage Foundation and Moms for Liberty, which I'm sure you're familiar with, was able to craft a set of regulations through the Department of Education, and in the process has sidestepped legislative oversight that is prescribed by tradition and in the code, and enacted a series of regulations that would allow the state to have final say in what books are and aren't allowed in district school libraries. This is really a really troubling development, and it's one that hasn't been vetted by our representatives. In addition, the budget proviso that was included last year to do with school censorship was used to cancel AP African American history in our public schools, leaving many students, including some in the Jewish community, without the AP college credit that they were promised as they began those courses at the beginning of the year. This is troubling for obvious reasons. And it's not just AP African American history that's on the chopping block. It's dual enrollment classes that involve Black history, and in no state has it stopped there. So, as a Jewish community, we certainly understand the importance of history, of teaching history to our young people, so that mistakes aren't repeated. That's why we engage in Holocaust education. It's why we continue to advocate against this educational censorship, and it's why we'll continue to advocate against it. But I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. You might have seen this article already, but as published in the Post and Courier, South Carolina has implemented one of the most restrictive censorship laws on school libraries in the United States. One of the things the headline has wrong, which I think is an important distinction to make, is that this isn't a law. It is a Department of Education regulation that did not go through the process that a bill goes through to become a law. It's not in the South Carolina Code. It uses, as this article says, as we've argued, really intentionally vague language so activists can use it to challenge any books that are against their political beliefs. And in general, what we see this as, and we see this on both sides of the political aisle and on both sides of the country in different ways, it is the politicization of school curricula. On the West Coast, that politicization has included ethnic studies curriculum, which are on their face a great thing, but have been tainted by the addition of anti-Israel, really political content, and they've had to push back against that. And here on the East Coast, in the South, where we have redder states, we have the opposite problem, where content that represents diversity is being erased, and some of it really important content. So it just shows you that across the country, when a political party or a political movement gains such a supermajority, the fringes, they really start to get out of control and try to impose their political views on the next generation. So, as this article mentions, this has been part of a surge in book bans across the country. There's been a huge number of contested books for the first time in years. In addition, and I'll leave you with this happy thought. I'm going to share with you a video posted by the ACLU of South Carolina. As Jews, this is particularly relevant to us, but our superintendent of education was up in Washington, D.C. at the Heritage Foundation and made pretty clear what some of her intentions would be for the future. And I think if you're Jewish, or if you're part of a religious minority, or you're secular, you might find some of these comments troubling, but they help indicate to us what may be coming in the near future. So really quickly, and this will be the last thing I show you before we start talking about Israel. Here we go.
And I'm so thankful for an opportunity like this to be able to consider an overtly faith based education and really a school that I think can become the beating heart of education in the heart of the free world. I would love to see, if not the abolishment of the Department of Education, Jimmy Carter's giveaway to those teachers' unions back in the 70s, block granting funds back to the states, because I know on the ground, a lot of Christian schools are very, very concerned about the dollar or the strings that come attached to federal dollars. But I also think that, that's at kind of the global level. At the micro level, I'm really excited about the innovation of micro schools, because I think faith-based micro schools could completely revolutionize education, especially in our neediest, most rural communities. And I want them to know that we do believe in them. We do believe in their God-given potential, and that through an innovation like a micro school, essentially a one-room schoolhouse that can be supported by education scholarship funds, those backpack funds following the student. Maybe we don't have to have a traditional brick and mortar school. We could have something smaller. Maybe there's classroom space in a local church that's just sitting empty during the week that we could harness. I think there's so much opportunity for innovation there that could serve students, truly serve students in every single community.
I think it speaks for itself, but this vision presented by our superintendent of education for overtly faith-based public education in our state, the elimination of the Department of Education, the use of churches, rooms in churches as schools, I think should be troubling to us as Jewish people. We can't be sure what the next step in that direction is going to be, but it's been made plain that that what some of our leaders would like to see is an elimination of the public school system as we know it, and the injection of a faith that we're not subscribed to into our public education for our kids. And obviously, this is unconstitutional. It goes against the First Amendment, which guarantees no establishment of a state religion, and it's something that we're going to have to pay attention to as the legislative session starts back up in January. In the meantime, we'll be hosting candidate forums. We'll be connecting with our elected officials, and we'll be asking some of you what you think we should be advocating for across the state. And so with that, I'm going to welcome on our JCRC chair, Brian Schulman, and we are going to talk about the journey that I've had to Israel. Brian is going to share some of some things that he learned in going to Israel, and hopefully we can pass along some of our experience to you and save you a $2,000 round trip ticket and maybe the agitation of losing a suitcase like I did. But welcome, Brian. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. When did you go to Israel with the Frank Fellowship?
So I went at the end of 2019, a couple of months before COVID started.
Wow, so that's about the last time that I went to as part of our partnership program, Leadership Together with Hadera Aaron. So we both experienced Israel at kind of a similar time.
Yeah.
So one thing that I didn't learn about on my first 2 trips to Israel, and probably wouldn't have known about if not for this trip, at least not for a long time, is that although in the West, we tend to think about conflict in Israel as Jews versus Arabs or Jews versus Palestinians, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the fact that Israel isn't itself a melting pot of Jews that kind of blend together. It's actually very distinct tribes of Jewish people with different religious practices, different histories, and different political interests, and different schools even, and neighborhoods that they live in. And Ruby Rivlin, the former president of Israel, made a famous speech in 2015 where he referred to these groups as the 4 tribes of Israel. And those 4 tribes being ultra-Orthodox Jews, known as Haredi Jews in Israel, national religious Jews or Dati Leumi Jews, who are modern Orthodox in their observance, but have a very distinct national identity. Secular Jews, which is really a big, broad category that doesn't necessarily dictate how religious or how observant or traditional Jewish people are, but indicate that they're not part of the organized religious factions within Israel. that's the broadest category currently. And then Arab Israelis, which includes Bedouins that live in the south, in the Negev desert, where they historically have lived and have set up cities. Arab villages throughout Israel, where the primary language spoken continues to be Arabic, where they learn in their own public schools in Arabic, and sometimes in mixed cities, which a lot of people don't know about, but are Jews and Arabs living together, in some cases going to school together and working together. And so these groups learn, live, love very differently. And, when I went to Israel, I thought the biggest thing that I would be thinking about is, what is Israel like post October 7th? But I realized there's so much that I didn't know about Israel before October 7th, and that each of these groups have experienced October 7th and post October 7th very differently, and have very different concerns. Obviously, and you'll see this in some of the pictures that I share, but the biggest concern for Israelis continues to be bringing the hostages home. There are people still in captivity in Gaza that were kidnapped on October 7th. And really all of Israel, whether they're Jewish or Arab, whether they're Palestinians who live in the Gaza and West Bank, are living, reeling from the trauma that happened on October 7th and continues to happen. And what I found when I got to Israel immediately from stepping off the plane is a country that is very focused on those hostages that were taken on October 7th, very concerned about the future, both of their government and their relationship to their neighbors and the current war. It was not the upbeat, vibrant Israel that I visited 5 years before, where people were generally really positive, even if they didn't agree with each other politically. I don't know if any of that resonates, but I'm going to try to share some pictures, and please forgive me. I had thousands of pictures. I'm not going to share them all, but each day that I was in Israel with Mandel, I got to experience a different one of those 4 groups. And in addition, after I finished my program, I went with other Mandel cohort members to meet some Palestinians from East Jerusalem as part of a program called Encounters. I went and stayed on a West Bank settlement with my cousins who I hadn't seen in 20 years. They're living in a whole nother world, and got to visit our partnership region. And in about 20 or so, 30 minutes, Aaron Boynton from Federation is going to hop on and talk to you about how you can plug into that partnership. So really quickly, let's see. And don't look if there are any crazy pictures on here. These came straight from my phone. But just to illustrate the point that I just made about hopping off the plane, this is in the airport, Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. As you can see, immediately upon getting off the plane, these are images of all the hostages that are still not home. Now you'll notice that at this point on the right here, you'll see Noah Argamani. She was rescued on the last day that I was in Israel. People were elated, but there are these displays of posters everywhere you go, on every street corner. In every town, there are displays of empty chairs with these folks' pictures on them. Everybody in Israel knows the stories of each of these hostages and their families. It is as if their family members were missing. And you can see here that some people have even come and added flowers or notes to the pictures. Everywhere in Israel has everything in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. It is a country with 2 official languages, Hebrew and Arabic. Also, right off the plane, and it was a hot day. I saw a sign that said shelter, and I thought it meant shelter from the sun and rain. And then I realized that it was an arrow towards where you could find a bomb shelter in case rockets were going off. And everywhere you go, I don't know if it was like this when you were there, Brian, but in every hotel, in every place, there were arrows that indicated where you could go, where the safest part of the building was, where there was a shelter if you needed it. Did you experience that in your trip?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It was that was in place already. In 2019 and 2014, I don't believe it was fully in place yet. When I was there.
After the second Intifada, if I understand correctly, they changed the building code so that all new buildings had to include shelters because of the rockets. Our hotel was in the old city of Jerusalem, where Jews, Arabs, and Christians all have sections of the neighborhood. This is the YMCA in Jerusalem. Everything there is constructed in old Jerusalem style. This is just an example. We went to the Mandel Institute in Jerusalem, and they had the photos of folks killed that were involved with Mandel, and hostages that have been taken. Everybody in Israel is touched by this, by what happened on October 7th in some way, and it was ever present in our program. So I took some pictures here. Our first day was about Haredi culture. Now, for those that don't know, Haredi folks are the ultra Orthodox, and they have some different sects within them, different backgrounds. There are Litvak Haredi Jews and Hasidic Haredi Jews, and even I think some Sephardi Haredi Jews. And this man was a Haredi economist that helped share some of what the challenges are, the beliefs of Haredi folks, and what the challenges are in terms of their economic situation. They're very worried about secularization of their kids. This is one of the reasons they don't want to serve in the military. They believe that their contribution to the state, in the relationship they do have with it, is to pray and to bring favor onto the Jewish people. So men in the Haredi community traditionally don't work in the sense that we in the modern world understand it. They go to yeshiva, they learn Torah and Talmud, and they spend their life learning and studying and basically being rabbis. That is their greatest aspiration, is to know more, to understand more, and to gain insight into the Torah. And they believe by doing that, they're bringing God's favor on the Jewish people. This causes, as you can imagine, a lot of conflict with the rest of Jewish society, who would like them very much to serve in the military. But in Israel, because of the political system, even though they're a minority group, they still they have a lot of political power. They all vote in blocks. Those folks go to the Knesset, and they're currently part of the ruling majority coalition. And that position has not only gotten them state funding for their schools, they have their own public schools. There's publicly funded school systems. It also has been able to successfully keep their young men out of the army. Now, women are a different story. Some of them do work, and they learn English and other subjects, but that's not the case for men, who primarily study in Yiddish and study the Torah. These people are all leaders that Mandel, the same program that brought me to Israel, have invested in. The woman all the way on the left, not the woman all the way on the left with the wig, with the red hair, is a police officer who works with Israeli police. It's a very unusual position for a Haredi woman to be in, but she has helped connect her community to services that police have to offer. The woman just to the right of her is studying Torah, which is very unusual for Haredi women who traditionally study more secular subjects. The first man is a capoeira instructor who is teaching young kids capoeira and engage in sports. And the man all the way to the right is preparing Haredi men for the workforce and changing that paradigm that Haredi men can't enter the workforce. So right after that, we went to a Haredi village neighborhood within Jerusalem called Geula. There are signs up everywhere. I took this picture at the school that we went to because it just shows you how many kids there are in a Haredi family. A lot of times they have 7 kids. They're the fastest growing segment of the Israeli Jewish population, and they're expected to be 30% very soon. This is within a traditional Haredi school where for girls, where they are actually learning Hebrew and they're learning English. These schools are funded by the Israeli government. There are signs up everywhere, and this is basically like Haredi social media. They put up signs, and thankfully, I had the benefit of being able to use Google Lens. And if you use Google Lens, you'll see that a lot of these are about like modesty and dress. A lot of them are about the issues of Haredi serving in the army and the threat. And I'll describe this in just a little bit. And so the Haredis face a lot of challenges. They do not, for the other groups in the state, they're not offering enough, and they're also the fastest growing segment of the population. As you can imagine, post October 7th, when the Israeli government has a constant presence, the military in Gaza, and now they're facing problems to their north. People are more irritated than ever before because they're being called up from reserve duty again and again and again, and the Haredim aren't going to the army. So it's becoming a hot topic in Israel. Did you get any exposure to the Haredi folks when you were over there, Brian?
Yeah, we went through pretty much the same standard proceedings where we went through that. Yep.
Cool. So I missed part of the program this day, which was the Dati Lumi Day. Dati Lumi means religious nationalist. These are basically the equivalent to modern Orthodox in terms of their level of observance, but they live in Israel in like a constant, basically holding conflicting ideas at the same time. They have a devotion to God. They believe that being in Israel is living redemption as prescribed in the Torah. They think it's a holy thing. That it's they're living their religious purpose by being in the state of Israel, but they also are strong supporters of the state of Israel, meaning they serve in the military, they serve in reserves. This gentleman who is speaking to us just gotten back from reserve duty. He's been called up to active duty more days than not, despite the fact that he has a job, a family. And this is the reality that a lot of Israelis are living in. And basically, even though these folks are modern Orthodox, it actually made me think a lot about the conservative Jews in America that live with a balance between modernity and tradition. These folks are dealing with the same thing. We got the same kind of panel that we got with the Haredi folks in terms of these people here are change makers in some way. The woman just to the right of this man is a woman who's a rabbi, which is unusual for Dati Lumi folks, but she leads a congregation. The woman to her right is teaching reproductive health care in modern Orthodox schools to make sure kids are getting that education and being safe. Here's a picture again, walking into a building. You see chairs, you see the people kidnapped. They're present everywhere in Israel. I can't state that clearly enough. I'm trying to find the other groups here. Sorry, these pictures are a little out of order. I was saying I missed part of this day because I lost my lost my suitcase on the way to Israel, and I didn't have my things for 3 days, so I had to go get things. Let's see if we can find some. All right, so Heloni folks. So, in between, I should say, this is Ben Barry. He's a Charlestonian who made Aliyah to Israel, who fought in Gaza after October 7th. Got called back to active duty from reserves. He is going to be joining us in 2 weeks to tell his story. It's a fascinating story. Good guy who went to Addlestone Hebrew Academy. But the next segment in Israeli society. So we have Haredi people who are ultra Orthodox, who live very segmented from the rest of Jewish society, who don't serve in the army, which is where all the other groups typically meet each other, and don't feel an obligation to the state in terms of working, in terms of paying taxes. The modern Orthodox folks, the Dati Lumi, the religious nationalist folks, they are not the same way. They're religiously observant, but they absolutely do feel an obligation to the state. They serve in the military. They're very concerned with Zionism. So in a lot of ways, they're opposite. They're holding kind of religious tradition and nationalism in two hands, and they vote together as religious nationalists. Both vote kind of to the right, but they vote in their interests of their group. And for religious nationalists, you'll see that they vote a lot for the expansion of land. A lot of them live in the settlements or yeshuvim, or in Israel. So some similar interests, some different interests. But the largest group is by far secular people in Israel. Secular Jews doesn't mean that they don't have tradition, and that they're not culturally Jewish. So this man is Jeremy Fogel. He's a professor, and he basically said something that we talk about a lot in America, which is Jewish can mean a lot of different things. It can mean Zionism. It can mean being religiously observant. It can mean being Larry David and having Jewish humor. It could be bagels. It could be being culturally Jewish. It could be a million different things. And for secular Jews, they are very much Jewish, but they do not live Jewish in terms of subscribing to very specific religious observances. Now there are Hiloni, like this man is, and there are Masorti Jews who do still observe traditions. They might keep Shabbat, they keep kosher, but they are secular. They don't go to shul. They're not living the same observant lifestyles as religious Orthodox folks. I would very much encourage you to read some of Jeremy Fogel's work. These are all secular Jews. So the woman on the right is a secular Jewish activist. She actually believes that Israel should be split into different territories for the different groups of Jewish society. And that way, one of their biggest concerns, for example, is they don't like buses being shut down on Shabbat. They don't like civil services not being available on Shabbat. They don't think people should not be allowed to drive through streets and neighborhoods on Shabbat or on Hagim. And so it's a big concern for secular Israelis that their neighborhoods are being taken over, that they can't live a secular life, that they can't go to school without being indoctrinated, even though they have their own school system. which is also publicly funded by the state of Israel. All the different groups have their own school systems. The secular Jews are upset because there's more and more religion encroaching into their education, including like Tanakh being taught, including biblical examples being used in other subjects like geography or math even. And it is leading a lot of secular Jews to want to separate themselves even geographically from the religiously observant Jews. The gentleman just to her right is Yuval Bernstein. He is the producer of a show called The Jews Are Coming, which you see in the background there, which is like political commentary, but they use biblical stories and historically Jewish stories to like blend commentary about what's happening in Israel today with all these stories. And a lot of classes, kids actually learn about biblical history by watching this funny program that involves skits. The woman just to his right is Ethiopian Jewish. She represents a group that of Ethiopian Jews that were mass migrated, airlifted from Ethiopia to Israel. Even though they've been separated from Israel for thousands of years, or certainly at least 1,000 years, they maintain Jewish traditions, and they now live in Israel. Now, in Israel, like in a lot of places, they experience discrimination in some cases and otherism. And she was talking about the way that they feel oppressed in some cases by the religious group, the more religious groups who upon their entry didn't consider them to be halachically Jewish, and they're dealing with issues with law enforcement in the same way that a lot of Black folks in America are, and they've adopted a lot of like the same movement work as Black Lives Matter in the States. Interestingly, though, she had a very strong message for the anti-Israel activists in the United States and among Black Lives Matter. She said it's been incredibly alienating, that they have it completely wrong about the dynamic between oppressed and oppressor. For what it's worth, that was her perspective. I took a lot of pictures of these folks. But this is a museum called the Gutmann Museum, where we learned about art, Israeli style of art, and how that was created. This woman, like a lot of Jews in Israel, is Mizrahi, and most Jews in Israel are people of color, in that they don't come from European Ashkenazi backgrounds like most American Jews do. This is a source of confusion, I think, for a lot of people in this current conflict as they discuss it in America. But when you go to Israel, even though in America most Jews are Ashkenazi and they look like me, they've got light skin, their family comes from Eastern Europe most immediately, and they escaped the pogroms and the Holocaust. A lot of Jews in Israel, in fact, most Jews in Israel are Mizrahi Jews. They're people of color. They fled to Israel from the surrounding Arab countries when they were expelled from those countries. They had to run for their safety. In this woman's case, her family came from Iran, and she talked about how Mizrahi Jews have experienced Israel and their unique contributions to Israeli culture and common misconceptions. And this was a historically Mizrahi neighborhood in Tel Aviv. There's a lot of transportation for walking and bike riding in Israel, in Tel Aviv. She talked to us a lot about, this is another picture of signs like they have throughout Israel in buildings that point you to bomb shelters like this one. There are signs everywhere that point to the safest area. I think there are even more now because of the war. Brian, when you went to, I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions that Jews in America and even non-Jews in America have about Israel. I think that they imagine that somehow like Jews are this group of like white Europeans that like read the Bible and said, all right, we're going to go to Israel and kick everybody out who lives there. And this is our land now because the Bible said so. And like somehow that's analogous to like white Americans versus black Americans and like colorism in the United States. But having been in Israel, that's not really the reality, is it?
No, I mean, it's hard, I think, for Americans to grasp the concept Israel is a nation state, which means that, they're a Jewish majority, which is by definition one of the definitions of what Israel is. So, of course, they are going to have Jewish symbols and favor Jewish life. And in the same way that France is also a nation state where French are the majority. So I think it's a bit of a misconception, and it's also tough to see from, being an American and how, the country is conducted here, and looking at it as a democracy in Israel, which to mention is also a younger nation than some of the developed countries. So I think it's definitely a misconception, and I think by going there and learning some of the points that you mentioned, it can help educate and clarify some of these understandings for sure.
Well, I'm going to skip right ahead because we're low on time to the most maybe controversial tribe of Israel, which is, of course, Arab Israelis, and technically not part of the tribe, but also Palestinians who are living next door. Now, one of the things that I learned as part of this experience is that even though a lot of Jewish folks, especially in America, refer to Arabs who live in Israel as Arab Israelis, for a lot of Arabs in Israel, they identify themselves as Palestinians. They identify themselves nationally in a nationalistic way, in the same way that Jews identify themselves as Israelis. I found that fascinating. It was something I had no idea about prior to going on this trip. Oh gosh, there's so much to share. But we visited Haifa, which is one of Israel's mixed cities where Jews and Arabs live together. I visited a school where Jews and Arabs go to school together and learn in Hebrew and Arabic because their parents wanted them to. We learned about a lot of programs like that are seeking to bring Jews and Arabs within Israel together. Listen, the reality is that that for Bedouin Arabs, for Arabs that live even in mixed cities, the public schools are still separate, and the Arab schools, to some extent, do not receive the same resources that Jewish schools in Israel do, and there's more crime in poverty in Arab communities, and there are laws built into the Israeli body of laws that were added recently that explicitly call Israel a Jewish state and assign a Jewish character to Israel in a way that can be seen as marginalizing for Arab Israelis. Now, in their schools, they learn in Arabic. They learn different things than the Jewish kids learn in their schools, but it doesn't mean that people don't come together. We were exposed to a cohort Mandel folks from near Haifa. This is them, who are Jewish and Arab. This man was an Ethiopian Jew who was displaced from his home in the north because of constant bombing. But I'm trying to find, these are members of my cohort. There was a woman that I spent a lot of time with named Fatia, who was really honest with me. This is her, about what her experience has been, and she works towards Arab rights in Israel. But I want to be very clear that Arab Israelis and Palestinians, at least the ones that I met, did not feel kinship with the protests happening in the United States. They felt very poorly represented. They absolutely want a two-state solution where folks have autonomy and opportunity and peace. They do not support the actions of Hamas. They pretty clearly see that terror is not the path towards normalization. And I think more than anything, they want what every human being wants across the world, which is safety, peace, opportunity, prosperity, economic opportunity. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people feel pretty pessimistic about the potential for getting there, both on the Israeli and Arab side. And I think if there was one overwhelming thing that I felt, it was that folks don't feel good about the government. They don't feel good about the direction that the government is headed in. They don't feel good about the war. They don't feel good that it's accomplishing the tasks that they wanted to accomplish. Some people think that Netanyahu should be fighting harder and more determinedly. And some think that they should make a peace deal right now and bring the hostages home. But folks are dissatisfied, and I think that folks are feeling conflict. And of course, between these groups, there are conflicts about what people think they should do. One of the things that was really interesting to me in Israel, and I know this gets called pinkwashing by critics of Israel, but the reality in Israel is that LGBTQ life is very integrated and celebrated. This is right around Pride time, but this is Haifa's City Hall, where you see an Israeli flag on the left, rainbow flag on the right. In every store, there are rainbows for sale. This Pride celebration in Tel Aviv this year was huge. Listen, I can talk more with folks individually about like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But the last thing I'll share about the current conflict that's going on is I was in Hostage Square. You see signs like this everywhere, but this is in Hostage Square where there are pictures of the hostages. Hostage Square started when a father of one of the hostages set up a chair across the street from like the Israeli version of the Pentagon and said, "I'm not moving until my daughter is brought home to me." And a lot of people ended up joining him, and luckily his family was brought home to him. But there are a lot of families who haven't, and every Shabbat they come out there, they do Shabbat services, and they have a huge demonstration here for the hostages to be brought home or rescued. Big slogan, bring them home. On the other side, there's a protest called Bring Them Home Now, where they demand that the government makes a deal to bring the hostages home and dissolves. They constructed a tunnel to show what hostages have gone through.
Brandon, just a quick question. When you say the government demands a deal, I mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the last I heard, Israel agreed to the latest proposal, and it was Hamas who turned the deal down. Am I mistaken when I say that?
No, I don't think you are. I think there's a perception in Israel that, at least among the people of one side of the political debate, that that Netanyahu has been intentionally stopping deals from being made.
Because I mean, we even saw it on the presidential debate last night. Not to go there. I do not want to go there, but it was stated factually, from my understanding, that it was Hamas who Israel agreed to the latest proposal, and Hamas said no. That was just what I heard.
You're 100% right, and I think the sticking point is that Israel has said that they absolutely are unwilling to agree to a permanent cessation of hostilities as part of the hostage deal. Hamas, obviously, who wants to preserve their power in the Gaza Strip, has refused any deal that will unseat them or that will continue Israel's military campaign to unseat them and remove them from power. So I think that all of these different sticking points mean different things to different Israelis, and they're just like in America, they're all over the political spectrum. And some think that, this was right after that deal was proposed, and it wasn't really clear whether Hamas was the one not agreeing or Israel was not agreeing. So it could be different in Israel now, but when I was there, there were the largest protests since October 7th by Israeli citizens calling not just on the hostage deal to be made, but calling on the government to dissolve so that a new leader could be selected. So there are a lot of different perspectives all mixed up in the general movement to bring the hostages home. And for some people who are yelling, bring them home, they're talking about like the military bringing them home. And on the last day that I was there, the military rescued 4 hostages, and the people were celebrating on the streets. It was very emotional. But that being said, I have a special guest waiting. And so I want to say that I wrapped up my trip in our partnership region in Israel. And for those of you that don't know, we have welcome Aaron. This is Aaron Boynton, our Chief Impact Officer, who also does our work, most of the work that we do with our partnership region. But for those of you that don't know, we have this amazing partnership region. It's Hadera Aaron. It's about an hour from Tel Aviv. And they're an area that's absorbed a lot of the displaced people, but it's got a long history. I got to see a lot of it while I was there. And I'm sure if any of you get to Israel, you'll experience this too if you go to our partnership region. But they were very welcoming. I got home hospitality, Shabbats at a family's house who's been in Hadera since before there was a state of Israel, and got shown to Zikron Yaakov, which is an amazing community. But long story short, we have a bunch of programs where we send people to that region, where people from that region come to us. And one of the ways that you can plug into Israel without even leaving Charleston or taking a $2,000 flight on El Al is by connecting to partnership. So, Aaron, tell us about what's going on with more about partnership together, what's going on in the coming weeks with partnership together, and how people can get involved.
Sure. So thanks, Brandon, for having me join you today. I think this is maybe my first podcast ever, or vlogcast, so very fun. So our Partnership Together program creates a living bridge between Charleston, the rest of the Southeast, and Hadera Aaron, and Prague is also part of our partnership. And the whole idea is to create friendships between not only Americans and Israelis, but also Americans in the Southeast, and also our larger partnership. And we do this kind of under a multitude of ways of connecting teens, connecting young leaders through a program called Leadership Together, connecting educators to share best practices, connecting classrooms. So Addlestone Hebrew Academy locally connects with Alanine Elementary School in our region. Also, Charleston local, Jasmine Hubara was a reverse shaliach. So she lived in our partnership region for about a year or so and brought Southern Jewish culture to our region. So it's all about cultural and relationship connections. It's the touchy-feely part of our work with Israel. And the reason why it's so important is because it really makes it real. For people in Charleston who've never been there, for people who maybe been but don't have family or friends in Israel, that's how you make those connections. And if you're a parent looking to make those connections with your kids, this is really one of the best ways to do that, to give them real life people who have real life experiences, living in Israel. And this program falls under the umbrella of the Jewish Agency for Israel, which is one of our international partners. One of the beautiful things about the partnership is connecting, some other cities in the Southeast that are part of it: Richmond, Chattanooga, Charlotte, Jacksonville, Greensboro, just to name a few. So it really shows off our beautiful Southern Jewish culture.
Yeah, I think people often get surprised in Israel that they don't understand geography. Some of them don't understand geography of America that well, but people get surprised when they find out there are vibrant Jewish communities in the South. Even folks from New York, I know folks from New York say the same thing, but Jewish looks different in Charleston than it does in New York, and it certainly looks different than it does in Israel. So I can imagine that they've found the experience of that reverse Shalia really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of leadership development opportunities to come together, talk about Jewish peoplehood, talk about differences between, what it means to be Jewish in Israel versus what it means to be Jewish in America, what it means to be American, what it means to be Israeli, and really having those deep conversations while also having a deep respect for each other's cultures.
So I know in the past we've had, as part of this partnership, we've had people come to the States. I myself and you, and did you go to Israel with Leadership Together?
I went with the educator delegation in 2019. I was there for Hanukkah.
So I learned so much about the difference between being Jewish in America and being Jewish in Israel from Leadership Together, because I got paired up with somebody in Hadera, and we did all these study sessions for months. And then I got to go with other people from Charleston around the Southeast to Israel and get home hospitality, stay in my partner's apartments, and really learn what life was like in Israel. And I think those connections have really last among those participants, and my partner's gotten to come to America from this program also, and gotten to show him around. And I know that we have folks going back and forth all the time. And certainly on October 7th, I'm sure you felt the same way. The first people that pop into my head were our partnership friends and their families. And
Exactly. And, it's really, it's been really challenging to hear from my peers in Israel, what's happening for them, what's happening for their families. They're still trying to do their everyday jobs while knowing that their children are fighting in the IDF, while knowing that their spouses are, in the reserves, that their families are in the north of Israel. And I have such compassion for what's going on there, and the people, just how it's affecting everyone's everyday life. And as you mentioned, we do have opportunities. So if you're planning to go to Israel, first of all, you have to go to our region. It's like a must. It's beautiful. And, if you contact me or someone at our federation, we're happy to connect you, have home hospitality, get shown around the region, have some of the best shakshuka you'll ever have in Israel from Chef Roy. Shout out to some of our favorite P2G participants. And also, if you're not going to Israel, but you want a connection, we often have Israelis coming from our region to Charleston. If you have an extra bedroom and are willing to host Israelis, please let me know, or want to be part in any way of helping to plan what they would see if they were coming to Charleston. What is a must see in our community? So I'm definitely your person to connect with the partnership.
Well, I can't recommend that highly enough. It certainly participating in that program was a game changer in terms of my connection with and understanding of Jews in Israel, and going to the region. I really felt what the impact of the war has been on regular people, not like hand selected Mandel leadership people or the people that we experience when we go to like more curated places, but like I tried to find a hotel in Hadera and they were full of displaced people who have been evacuated from northern cities that are being bombarded by Hezbollah. And as I talked to our people that we would normally see, their family members are deployed in Gaza. They're getting called back and forth from active duty, and it's a very different reality than normal. And I think people here often think that the war is only being felt in like one small part or just in Gaza, but it's been a very real and continuing impact on every Israeli. There's no Israeli that's not being impacted by the war, and that's really the beauty of this program. It's getting to connect with regular people, people like you would be if you were living in Israel in a regular town. Like Hadera is not Tel Aviv, but Charleston isn't New York either. So maybe it's more analogous to our lives.
I do want to share one specific project that's coming up with the partnership. I know as October 7th, 2024 draws closer in date, we're all thinking about how we're going to feel that day and what we might be doing to commemorate what happened. And so if you are artistic in any way and you want to connect with an Israeli artist from our region and to create something to honor, you would meet with some of the bereaved families of those who were murdered on October 7th to create something in their memory together. Wow. So we are looking for some artists from Charleston to participate in that program. Unfortunately, the deadline is June 30th to apply. So if you're interested, you got to contact me soon. And we would love to have you join us.
What a special project. I know that, for the families that lost folks on October 7th, they're obviously still in a place of grieving, and it's not like a normal, when a loved one dies in a violent crime, it's not like a normal, your grandmother passing away that you can see something, it's expected, or it's coming. It is a traumatic event, and in Israel, it's hard to escape the trauma because everybody is feeling it, and you're constantly reminded of it everywhere you go. I can't imagine, but I know that it means the world to have other folks joining them and consoling them in that grief. When I was and I didn't even talk about this earlier, but when I was in the settlement in the West Bank, we were on dune buggies, and we ran into somebody completely randomly who was setting up like a gazebo in the middle of nowhere, and then like on top of a hill, and like benches. And we started talking to her. Her daughter was killed on October 7th, and they were putting her daughter's name up on this gazebo and dedicating this spot for people to sit and reflect in memory of her daughter. And she asked if she could take a picture with me, and I said sure. And I had no idea why she would want to take a picture with me. And she said, I want you to show this picture to people back home so so that they can think of my daughter, and what happened, and keep that in mind with everything going on. And so I know that anything that keeps the memories of these family members alive is just, I mean, life-changing for the survivors, for their family members. That's so cool. Well, next week, or 2 weeks from now, on July 12th, we're going to get joined by Ben Barry. He's a young man who grew up going to Addlestone here in Charleston, whose family goes to Congregation Dor Tikva, and he made Aliyah. Of course, when he did that, he had no idea that in just a couple of short years, Israel would be in one of the most significant wars in its history. And he was here in Charleston visiting his family on October 7th for the high holidays. And the next day, he flew back to Israel, hitchhiked to the south, to Gaza, the Gaza envelope, and joined forces immediately, clearing the Gaza envelope of the terrorists that had infiltrated the south. And he's got quite a story to tell. And he's just, I mean, just one of the best people that I've had the chance to meet, and I think everybody's really gonna be captivated by his story. So it's something not to miss. And with that, Shabbat Shalom. See you in a couple of weeks. If you have any questions about anything we talked about, you can reach out to me. You know how to get in touch with me. You can comment on this video. You can reach out to Aaron. I'll put y'all in touch. We're here to serve. So Shabbat Shalom.